Welcome to BeFrightened. We tell stories that will keep you up or help you sleep at night. The apartment building in Albany, New York was quiet most nights. I worked the night shift job, and the routine was familiar. Check IDs, sort mail, watch security feeds. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills after a cross-country move following a breakup. At 2 a.m., the lobby intercom buzzed. The security monitor showed an unfamiliar man in a dark cap at the door. He buzzed again, more insistent. I asked for his name and who he was visiting. The man claimed he was there to see a friend, but wouldn't provide details. When entry was denied, his demeanor changed instantly. He began pacing in front of the door, demanding to be let in. The situation escalated quickly. The man pulled out a gun, visible on the security feed. I called the police while keeping an eye on the monitor. The man outside grew more agitated, pacing faster and glaring at the camera. I was scared beepless. I waited for the police to arrive. Every sound in the lobby seemed amplified. The man kicked the glass door repeatedly. His eyes looked wild, unfocused. He seemed drunk or high, making him even more unpredictable. He disappeared from view momentarily. The camera feed showed him at a nearby dumpster. He returned with a metal pipe, brandishing it alongside the gun.
"Let me in."
His muffled scream came through the door. He started smashing the pipe against the card reader. Sparks flew everywhere. The reader flickered, then momentarily went dark. If damaged enough, the door might unlock automatically, I guessed. Thankfully, it was able to take the punishment dished out. I called the police again and urged them to hurry the F up. The man alternated between attacking the locking mechanism and pacing, muttering to himself. He pressed his face against the glass. His bloodshot eyes settled on the security camera. He pointed the gun directly at the lens, smiling. I could hear sirens in the distance, and I assume he did too, because suddenly he stopped. Then he stared directly into the lens and gave me the one-finger salute before briskly walking out of view. Switching between camera feeds showed him exiting through the parking garage, disappearing into the darkness. When the police finally arrived, a couple of officers entered the lobby. They asked for details about the incident. I showed them the security footage. They took notes, radioed a description of the man to other units in the area. One officer stayed in the lobby while the others searched the building and surrounding area. The wait felt endless. The officer returned with no sign of the intruder. They promised me that they would increase patrols in the area for the rest of the night. As they left, the lobby felt emptier, and I felt more vulnerable. I called the building manager to report the incident. He sounded groggy and annoyed at being woken up. He said he'd come by in the morning to review the footage. He really didn't seem to grasp the seriousness of the situation. The rest of the shift crawled by. The gun the man had brandished kept replaying in my mind. What if he came back? What if next time he got inside? At 4 a.m., a tenant came home late. I nearly jumped out of the chair at the sound of the door opening. The tenant noticed the tension and he asked if everything was okay. I gave a vague answer about a disturbance earlier. I didn't want to cause a panic. 5 a.m. brought the usual early risers. A few people heading out for work or early morning jogs. I watched each one carefully on the monitors as they exited the building. The fear of the gunman returning hadn't subsided. One of the early morning tenants mentioned seeing a suspicious car in the parking lot. I checked the cameras immediately, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Was the man still out there, watching and waiting? At 6 a.m., I thought I saw movement on one of the exterior cameras. My heart stopped for a moment. It turned out to be a stray cat. The adrenaline rush left my hands shaking. 6:30 a.m., the morning shift finally arrived. Gave them a rundown of the night's events. They looked concerned, but not overly worried. It wasn't their shift that had been threatened. The night's events felt almost unreal, but the police report and the security footage were stark reminders. It had happened. The man with the gun had been there. Thankfully, he never did come back. Working the night shift was the only option that fit my life. A small motel off a lonely stretch of US Route 50 in Nevada, where the guests were few and the nights were long. It worked for me, covering the bills. My son was asleep at home, looked after by my husband, while I manned the desk, making sure the hours passed without trouble. The job was straightforward. I kept the books, checked the rare guest in, and waited for dawn. But tonight was different. I wasn't alone. Carlos, my coworker who handled maintenance, was on site doing repairs in the lobby. A little after 3:30 a.m., the front door opened. A man walked in. He was looking disheveled and unsteady. He didn't make eye contact, just mumbled something about needing a room. His clothes were dirty. I handed him the key, and he tossed me some cash on the counter before heading down the hall. There was something about him which didn't sit right with me, but I let it go at the time. Time crawled after that. Carlos and I had gone to the boiler room. He needed a quick hand with something, leaving the lobby unstaffed briefly. After helping him, I returned to the lobby, and I continued doing not much. Then, the basement alarm beeped. I checked the security monitor and could see that the basement door was ever so slightly open. It was supposed to be locked. The man from earlier crossed my mind, but I wasn't sure what to make of it. After the alarm went off, I went to go get Carlos from the boiler room. The basement door being open wasn't something we could ignore. We both knew it should have been locked. Carlos grabbed a flashlight, and we headed down the hall. Carlos pushed the basement door fully open. It was dark in the basement, except for the flashlight beam. Carlos told me to follow him, but to stay close. I was happy to oblige and stay behind. No arguments from me. Inside the basement, we found that the door to a small utility closet was slightly ajar. Its lock had been broken. Inside were some rusted tools and a few old cardboard boxes, but nothing really that interesting. We didn't know what to make of it. I thought that we probably should be calling the police. But before we did, Carlos suggested that we search the basement a bit more thoroughly. There was something off about the situation, and we didn't want to miss anything important. We split up, Carlos checking the far corner, while I stayed searching near the utility closet. Carlos called me over. He'd found another broken lock on a small closet, but it was empty. Dust on the floor showed recent footprints, leading further back into the basement. We continued on, following the trail. The footprints led us to a narrow door next to a cabinet at the back of the basement. I'd never seen this door before. Though, to be fair, I rarely ever went down to the basement. It had always given me the heebie-jeebies. I later learned that the cabinet had been moved to reveal the door. The door was slightly opened. Inside was a large, hidden room, kind of a storeroom, it seemed at the time. Carlos searched the area with his flashlight. Then suddenly a noise came from up ahead. Within the room, in an area that we couldn't see from standing at the doorway. That was it for us, enough exploring. It was time for us to get out, and calling the police was the only option. This was way above our pay grade. Backing out of the basement, we rushed back to the lobby, closing and locking the basement door behind us. I grabbed the phone and dialed the local police. While waiting for the police, I kept my eyes on the security monitor. 10 minutes or so later, the police arrived. I quickly pointed them towards the basement, explaining the open door, the broken locks, and the noises that we heard from below. They asked us a bunch of questions. They, along with Carlos, went down the hall to the basement door, which Carlos unlocked for them. The police continued down the stairs to the basement while Carlos came back and we watched on the security monitor. It showed them going down the stairs with guns drawn. The coverage from then on was non-existent. As the basement was far away from guests, it had been thought that there was no need for further cameras inside. The police were able to locate the hidden room, and inside there, they found the intruder and arrested him. He was apparently crouched by a storage cabinet, trying to pry it open. They grabbed him, cuffed him, and brought him back upstairs. It turned out not to be the guest I checked in earlier, just a local crook who was well known to the police. I felt terrible about thinking that it was the guest, and coming to that conclusion based off of nothing much. The intruder must have snuck in while I was helping Carlos with the boiler. We later learned that there was a safe in the hidden room, which the owner of the motel kept his most valuable possessions. Fresh out of the military after 2 tours in Afghanistan, adjusting to civilian life hadn't been easy. Nightmares and hypervigilance made sleep elusive, so when a night shift security position opened up at a small local mall in New Jersey, it seemed like the perfect fit. A way to put those sleepless hours to use while figuring out the next steps. In December 2023, the mall was quiet after hours, its corridors empty and storefronts dark, offering an eerie backdrop to the new job. The first 3 nights passed without any incident. Patrols, lock checks, and camera monitoring filled the hours. On the 4th night, something changed. During a walkthrough of the West Wing, something about a mannequin in a store window appeared off. At first glance, it seemed like its head had turned slightly, now facing the corridor. A second later, it was back in its original position, leaving an unsettling sense that something wasn't right. That moment marked the beginning of a series of inexplicable events within the mall's walls. I started my patrol as usual, heading down the West Wing. Halfway through the corridor, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, expecting to see a late cleaner perhaps, but saw no one. I resumed walking. The footsteps started again, matching my pace. I spun around quickly. The hallway was empty. The footsteps stopped with each pause, only to resume when I moved again. With every patrol loop, they seemed to draw closer. I changed my patrol route and headed towards the food court. The footsteps continued, trailing behind. I picked up my pace and looked for anything out of place. I spotted movement between the tables in the food court, a shadowy figure in the distance that I couldn't make out. "Security," I called out. "Come out now." The figure moved again, moving towards the far end. I followed the figure. It seemed to stay just out of sight, slipping from shadow to shadow. Despite my best efforts to catch up and get a clear look, it remained elusive. The radio crackled with static, whilst I went to report the possible intruder. In my time prior and time since, I have had no such reception issues with the radio in the mall. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, the PA system came to life. An unfamiliar voice came on, announcing the closing time for stores long gone from the mall.
Attention all shoppers. Store Big J's will be closing.
My attempts to use the radio again proved futile. With the strange announcements continuing, the next logical step was to check the control room for answers about the PA system malfunction. The control room door was locked, as expected. Upon entering, everything appeared normal. The security monitors displayed their usual feeds, and the PA system console was inactive. No sign of recent use or malfunction was evident. Returning to the patrol route, the disembodied announcements had ceased. The mall was silent again. The food court was empty. Suddenly, sounds erupted from the direction of the arcade. Footsteps mixed with the distinct chimes and beeps of game machines. Approaching the arcade, faint sounds became audible. The main gate was still locked, but a dim, flickering light could be seen inside. It seemed odd, given that everything should have been powered down hours ago. Using the master key, I unlocked the gate and pushed it open. Inside, a few of the older machines were blinking and beeping softly. It was strange. These machines shouldn't have power, let alone be active. Moving deeper into the arcade, one machine in particular caught my eye. Its screen flickered weakly, displaying what looked like an old game start screen. As it came into full view, the screen suddenly went dark. In the silence that followed, the soft sound of footsteps could be heard again, this time from behind. Turning around, the arcade entrance was empty. The footsteps had stopped. A quick scan of the room revealed nothing out of place, aside from the few active machines. I decided to power down the arcade manually. The circuit breaker panel was located near the entrance. Upon opening it, all the switches were already in the off position. This didn't make any sense. How were the machines running? Just then, the radio crackled back to life. The night supervisor's voice came through, but the static made it very hard to understand. Before I could respond, the machines in the arcade abruptly went dark and silent, as they should have been all along. The radio cleared up, and the supervisor's voice came through again, this time much clearer. He had been on a break, He asked for details about the reported intruder, and then told me to meet him in the control room. He was on his way there. After a brief explanation of the strange events, I did a final sweep of the arcade. Everything seemed normal now. No flickering lights, no mysterious sounds. It was as if nothing had happened. I headed toward the control room, and the supervisor arrived a few minutes later. Together, we reviewed the security footage from the past hour. To my surprise, the cameras showed nothing unusual. Just empty corridors, a still, quiet arcade, and me making my rounds. Even when I was reacting to the strange events, nothing seemed out of the ordinary on the footage. It was as if all the weirdness had happened just off camera, or worse, in a way that the cameras couldn't capture. Once the supervisor left, I resumed my patrol, trying to shake off all the weirdness. Something still felt off though, but I continued my rounds. Nothing else out of the ordinary happened during that night shift. After that night, I experienced no other supernatural-ish events while working at the mall, thankfully. But I must admit, the days and weeks following, I really did dread going into work.